Hello, test. Hello, check. Hello, test. Hello, test.
Hello.
If somebody's going to be talking with this one, is he going to be talking with it all the
I
time?
will be using this one, so I am moderating. So
Okay.
I'll speak, and then I'll call somebody to speak. They will use their mic. So while they are speaking, I want to be able to turn this off, or should I leave it on?
Okay, hold on a second.
Hello.
هي عاوزة إنه هي المفروض إن هي تستعمله عشان هي مودريتور، فهي ساعات تتكلم وساعات لا، فهي عاوزة تشغله لما تفتح.
يعني انت شغله لها.
خلاص انا كده كده فاتح عندي، هي تفتح تقفل من عندها.
Is it okay to just leave it on?
ممكن تفضل فاتحه.
Hello. Hello.
You can keep it on all the time. Okay. No problem.
الو. هلو. عليه لها شويه.
Let me try. Test, test, test.
Speak out. Order is we have Dipti first, we have Reverend second. You're going to be speaking about the gas grab in Africa and the corporate culture. But then it's going to be really fast because I know you have a lot of information for us and you want to share with us. So after Nemo, we are going to have Tom. After Tom, we are going to have Kwame. So it's the same order in which we are seated that we are going to speak. Yes. So we have 5 minutes to speak, and then we have the remaining 2 minutes for maybe closing remarks after the questions. Hello. Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. You're welcome into this space. I welcome you all. My name is Aderon Keige from Corporate Accountability, Public Participation, Africa, domicile in Nigeria. But of course, everyone you see at this table today is a comrade. We have been together. We are totally and together asking for what is real justice in the climate space. Enough of all the lip service, and that's why we say enough of blah, 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 because that's what we've heard so far. And if you look at the subject we are going to be speaking about, it's talking about building a future of real solutions as opposed to a fossil fuel house of cards, which it has now become. And it's really ironical that we call these the side events. Our events are usually the side events. But if you ask me, these are actually the real events wherein the people's positions are captured. The real conversations happen here. And that is what we're going to be doing also today, talking about what the real solutions are and how 4 solutions have been paraded so far. And they have tried to confuse the people with these so-called ideas and mind games being paraded as solutions. And today also, it's an honor for us to be to have this lineup of speakers. We have panelists who are going to be doing justice to different topics or subjects as it concerns us generally as a people. I'm going to be introducing one by one. From my far left, we have Dipti. Dipti is not unknown to many of us. Dipti Batnaga. She's from Friends of the Earth International and Friends of the Earth Mozambique as well. Immediately after Dipti, we have somebody in Nigeria who we now call an ancestor. That is Nimobasi. Nimobasi is the executive director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation, HOMEF. And of course, he has led the movement and struggles on so many other grounds and is leading so many movements at the moment. To my right, I'll have another ancestor. Tom. Tom is an ancestor in the order of Nemo as well, and they are friends. So I'm really privileged to be flanked by these 2 men. Tom Goldtooth is the executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, and is going to be speaking on some topics as well today. And to my far right, we have Kwame Kponzo. Kwame is a comrade, is from the Global Forest Coalition, also Oil Watch Togo. Kwame is going to be speaking to us as somebody who is also involved in the struggle, who has done a lot of work exposing the lies and hypocrisy of the fossil fuel industry and even some government, Global North government, and all of the people who are conspirators in this agenda. So we are going to be hearing from them. So I will start from Dipti. Dipti is going to give us an overview of what we are talking about, even when we talk about the COP space itself beginning to, or well, for a while now, has become a house of cards. And then the 4 solutions that have been paraded so far in our faces, how we have uncovered some of these things and anything you feel confident sharing with us. So Dipti. Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think it's important to acknowledge where many of us have just been. The march that we've been at, where a lot of our people are still over there. We need to use every space available to raise our voices. It is ludicrous that we are marching inside the UN space, but this is where we find ourselves. This is the moment that we find ourselves in. And for us to be here, all of us, bringing the voices of those who could not be here is really, really important for us to be in solidarity. There are so many people across the world whose lives and livelihoods and homes and communities and countries have been completely devastated by fossil fuels. And so there are 2 types of responses that we're seeing to the climate crisis. It's the sort of Trump versus Biden camps. So there's the outright climate denialism, which says this is not real, this is not happening, denying people's experiences, denying when Cyclone Idai hit the coast of Mozambique and Malawi and Zimbabwe, and what climate change is actually doing to people's communities. The other side is using the climate crisis to continue to find ways to extend financial markets, using the climate crisis to continue find ways in which power holds on to itself. And one of the ways that happens is through carbon markets and carbon offsets and what we call false solutions. So the the entrenchment of continuing to use fossil fuels, what we call fossil futures, one of the ways that it's really kept alive is through carbon markets, and that is what we're here to give our critiques on. The concept of net zero has this assumption that emissions can be balanced out by removals. So the corporations and countries are telling us, no, don't worry, we know we need to reduce our emissions, but we're going to sequester it. We're going to find a way to magically pull that out of the atmosphere, and then we'll be okay, don't worry. And this is the lie that they've been trying to sell us, that we need to be fighting against, because offsets and removals are not the same thing. Of course, all our natural systems, lands, forests, our water bodies, they have the ability to sequester carbon just by functioning the way that they do. But there is a huge difference between fossil carbon and terrestrial carbon, and that is an important distinction that the negotiators and those in power in this space are very happy to ignore and just throw it out of the window, but we won't let them do that. Because we know that ending fossil fuels and ending that fossil carbon is extremely important to be able to stop the climate crisis. And using forests and lands, the terrestrial sources, to try and stop that, to try and compensate the fossil carbon is absolutely impossible. We need to be able to stop the fossil carbon and, of course, enhance the ability of our ecosystems to keep communities alive and to continue to do the work of absorbing carbon as they always do. But we also very much talk about the inherent value of forests and ecosystems. So the conversations that happen here, the carbon accounting reduces forests and lands down to their ability to sequester carbon. Okay, how many gigatons and all of those numbers, while completely forgetting that these forests, these lands are keeping communities alive. In Mozambique, where I come from, 70% of our people are subsistence-based communities, farmers, fisher folk, who are living with these ecosystems, with the mangroves, with the forests, with the lakes, and these healthy ecosystems, which of course indigenous peoples and local communities are the ones that have protected these ecosystems. These ecosystems are keeping these communities alive. And for us, that's why the forests and the ecosystems are so much more than their carbon potential, because these are actually keeping communities alive, and that is the level of the conversation that we need to be having, not about how are we going to strip away everything that is important about the forest and just talk about a number and gigatons of carbon that it can sequester. So this is the level of conversation that we need to be changing. We've seen a complete blow up of the number of carbon markets ever since last year. COP26 gave the go-ahead for the compliance carbon markets that take place here in this space under the UNFCCC. At the same time, we're also seeing an explosion of voluntary carbon markets. The task force on scaling up voluntary carbon markets with Mark Carney from the Bank of England. These are the type of people that are involved in this business. Last year, some of us produced a report called The Big Con, which was looking through the net zero plans of big corporations from EasyJet to JBS to United Airlines to Shell and BP, and really having a look at those, and what we realize is that there's absolutely nothing in there. So this is what we need to be opposing. And here, what we see in this space, what we see happening right now, is that the Article 6.4 recommendations that the supervisory body has put forward are just so scary, because it's opening the door to land-based offsets and geoengineering offsets. And this has the potential to completely change the way that communities deal with and rely on their ecosystems, on their environment to be able to survive. And this is it's absolutely unconscionable that we continue down this road while we're continuing at the same time to do more and more fossil fuel production and financing. And of course, the global north is continuing down this road with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the rush for African gas, which of course Nemo is going to talk about more. It's unconscionable that the fossil fuel proliferation is continuing and continuing, and because of that, this house of cards is being created and propped up because power doesn't really have the ability to say, okay, we need to stop doing what is actually damaging us, our bodies, our communities, and the planet. And this is what we need to be saying no to. We need to be saying no to offsetting. We need to be saying no to geoengineering. And this is the moment right now, today, 12th of November at this COP, to push back on what is happening here and to not allow them to continue taking us down this very, very dangerous road. I'll stop here for now. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Dipti. That was very deep. I'm happy Dipti made a reference to the Beacon report that was made, which is absolutely an expose of the 4 solutions that have been paraded so far. She made mention of geoengineering, carbon offset, which we know is a lie. So promising net zero as a solution is promising a magic that that stands against logic or against reason at all. There are no procedures or even methods that are proven for these things to work. And that's what Dipti has been able to also do justice to. Thank you very much, Dipti. And while Dipti was speaking, she mentioned, she spoke briefly about gas, which is what we are coming to now. And I'm going to come to Nemo. We have seen a lot of corporate capture on the soil of Africa, in Africa. We are seeing also the abuse that has gone on the land for so long. There's also gas grab that is currently taking place on the soil. We would like for you to say something more about this, and then, you know, just talk about the corporate abuse in general and what we should be pushing at the moment.
Thank you so much, Ronke, and thanks, Dipti, for your presentation. Let me first say something about. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah? Or should I eat it? Okay, no, it's fine. I must say that the very idea of net zero is a negation of reality and a refusal to look for real climate action. And this is why most countries and corporations are so happy to say they're going to achieve net zero by 2050, 2060, 2070, just pushing the harms onto and the responsibility onto future generations, irresponsible leaders who are unwilling to take action today to tackle the issue. And this is the same notion that is promoting the dash for gas in Africa. And we're seeing the invasion of the continent hinged on the war in Ukraine, which has also exposed the hypocrisy of some nations who claim to be climate actors or climate people who care about the climate. And so we're having war in Europe and a continuation of wars in Africa, because every oil field is a war zone. Every oil field in Africa is a war zone, because these resources are extracted behind military shields without regard to human rights and without regard to the rights of the Mother Earth herself to maintain her natural cycles. We've seen this in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, which I'm sure Dipti can say a lot about. Since gas was found there and the plans to extract the gas began, we've had increased violence, displacements, all kinds of things going on there. All none to the benefit of the people, but everything to harm the people and the planet. We're seeing a new drive to extract gas from the Niger Delta in Nigeria, to pipe it to Morocco, and then from there to Europe. Another plan to establish a gas field in the Niger Delta, take gas from there through the Sahara Desert to Algeria, and from there to Europe. None of this infrastructure is aimed at providing energy for Africa. It's all for extraction and for export to other nations who are never satisfied with the amount of energy they have. And if we were serious about global warming and taking action to fight global warming, the kind of explosion of investment in oil and gas in Africa would not even be contemplated. By 2050, there's a plan to invest up to 450 million US dollars, billion US dollars in fossil fuel extraction in Africa. This doesn't say anything about the world being aware that burn of fossil fuel is responsible for global warming. And if we knew that, we shouldn't be investing in new oil and gas. We've heard our leaders shockingly campaigning here, launching a carbon market mechanism for Africa, and announcing that Africa is going to grab the oil, grab the gas. Africa is going to develop, whether anybody likes it or not, we're going to develop with oil and gas. You know, it sounds beautiful, and actually I could make it into a slogan and just march. Africa must grab the gas. Africa must grab the oil, but we are grabbing it for export, not for use on the continent. And so it's nonsense for anyone to say that that is going to help the continent. The workforce in the fossil fuel industry in Africa, the total workforce on the continent, is made up of only 1% of Africans, 1% Africans in the workforce of the fossil fuel industry in Africa. In terms of investment, not more than 5% of the investment in the sector is made in Africa. Therefore, the entire fossil fuel scenario is nothing to do with Africa. Doesn't provide employment. It doesn't add anything to the economy. It is voodoo economics that provides money for politicians to play games with lives where people are dying daily in the oil fields, dying daily in the gas fields, drowning in the floods and dying from droughts. So the addiction to fossil fuel is the foundation of the false solutions we're seeing at the COP. The COP itself, since it adopted the voluntary mechanisms of emission reduction in Copenhagen in 2009, has fallen deeper and deeper into that pit. And now, you see, talk about the nationally determined catastrophes. No, nationally determined contributions, but it's actually catastrophes. And that's what I meant to say. And what we see from the emissions gap report is that of all the so-called ambitions from all nations, they are not making a dent on the amount of carbon that needs to be taken out of the atmosphere. Therefore, the whole COP is based on the wrong premise, it's on the wrong direction, and no matter how far you go in the wrong direction, you can never get to the right destination. And therefore, the COP, broken, damaged, and lost, needs to be transformed into a people's COP that discusses real solution and not offset, not carbon offset, not carbon trading. When we see a forest, it mustn't be, we don't see forests as carbon. Forests are complex ecosystems, living ecosystems, communities of culture, of religious beliefs and things, and this is what we need to protect. Preserve life, preserve our communities, preserve our cultures, and not sell it on a mess of porridge for a few carbon coins that don't help anyone. And so let me conclude by saying, before Ronke leaps on the microphone, that our position is that right now, we should, when I say our, I mean the Oil Watch International, demanding that the climate debt be recognized and paid. Because historically and even currently, that debt is being owed. The grabbing of gas in Africa for burning in Europe or elsewhere is compounding the climate debt that is being owed. We must recognize this and pay. And the world has to learn to stop wars. We've destroyed our nations, and we're still building up weapons and destroy more of our nations. I came with a book that just came off the press called Akambamfna. In my language, it means big trouble. It's a book about climate cures in the animal kingdom. We think we're the only ones affected by climate change, but migratory birds from Europe can't find their way to Africa. They can't find the rivers, they can't find the forest, they can't find nothing, they're just confused. And so if animals were to be given seats in the negotiation hall here, the talk would be different from what we have now. And so we need to really reset our minds and begin to think the way that we should think, that we are not separate from Mother Earth. We are just one of the beings occupying the planet, and we don't have the right to destroy Mother Earth and distort her right to maintain her cycles and to provide a livable environment for all of us. Carbon offset destroys our home, and we have to call it for what it is and reject it and never even accept anything called net zero, because net zero is not zero.
Thank you so much, Nimobasi. I was tempted to stop you when the time was up, but I felt like that was going to be a crime against humanity because of the deep sense that you were making. And, Nimo said something about no matter how far or how long you go in a wrong direction, you can't arrive at a right destination because it's already a wrong direction. Thank you so much for, everything that you exposed. It was so many things in one, about how even the gas grab currently happening in Africa is not about Africans. It's not developing anyone. It's still being exported, to Europe. So who benefits at the end of the day? And overall, it doesn't benefit anyone eventually. And net zero is like leaving a debt for the future generation. So it shows a sense of irresponsibility. And I remember at a time, I think it was after the COP last year, COP26, that you also described the COP itself as a carbon trade fair. That's what it is. And then this year, you have now come again to add to that to say the COP itself is lost and damaged. So when we are talking about even lost and damaged financing, we should be careful what we are talking about. So thank you so much. I told you we have a really vibrant and brilliant panel. It's unfortunate that time is always really short when you have these kind of resources at your table. So I'm going to come to you now, Tom. Tom has led movement for years, year in, year out, and you have been making some of these proclamations as well. You have made demands. Also being someone who leads a movement of the indigenous peoples. So Tom, you are going to be speaking to us about the finance aspect, a bit about equity, and then Article 6 itself. Let us know how that affects us, what we should be looking out for, and what we should really be demanding at the moment. So 5 minutes, Tom.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for corporate accountability in this new initiative, public participation, Africa. I know I'm going to run out of time, but I'm going to keep within the 5 minutes. But we do have a barcode here of the report that we filed on our analysis of the climate finance. But the UN, we got to look at the UN, the World Bank, and other multilateral development banks as a colonial institution whose work reproduces a colonial legacy of dispossession and inequality. The origins of these institutions, as well as the projects under each, position the global South, indigenous peoples and local communities, especially here in the continent of Africa, as unknowledgeable, marginalized. Instead of recognizing our communities, indigenous peoples and local communities, as critically important experts of land, waters, air, and community needs with solutions. At best, climate finance projects implemented by these institutions so-called consult without meaningful consultation standards and do not ultimately share any decision-making power or direct funds, undermining efforts for indigenous self-determination and full recognition of indigenous inherent rights. Moreover, traditional knowledge is either completely ignored or dismissed or picked over for bits that can be co-opted and incorporated into greenwashing efforts. The relationship here is still one of extraction. Institutions engaging in climate finance, mitigation, adaptation finance, loss and damage, and the banks choose projects based on their ability to generate profit and maximize private sector involvement. Climate change is simply treated as the newest arena for capitalism, financial expansion and development, once again entrenching the dynamic of exploitation and violence from the global north under the guise of helping the global south. This is history repeating itself, eh? It is the same development paradigm that contributed to the climate crisis in the first place, this time with even less accountability, but a greener image. These funds and the larger push to financialize climate change do nothing to address the root cause of climate change. They do nothing to reduce emissions at source, nor keep fossil fuels in the ground. There are no accountability mechanisms led by local communities or indigenous peoples to ensure that projects in fact address climate change. New financing facilities in climate finance, such as a loss and damage financial facility, do not offer new solutions or new ways of thinking. They just funnel money into more of the same false solutions that have been peddled, merchandised, and hustled for years. There is a difference between funding and finance. Communities impacted by climate change require direct community involvement, community-led funding, not financial institutions and financialization. So we know, as what was said before quickly, the solutions pushed under the UNFCCC are false solutions that actively perpetuate the climate crisis. This includes REDD, nature-based solutions, sustainable forest management, carbon trading, carbon offsets, climate-smart agriculture, and the 30 times 30 conservation and biodiversity offset scams, and geoengineering techno-fixes, such as the Arctic Ice Project, CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, and its carbon pipelines and solar radiation management. So the push to financialize climate and to create large climate funds with development and financial institutions skirts around real solution. They distract the root causes of climate change and allow polluters to keep on polluting while indigenous peoples and local communities continue to face the violent land grabs and environmental, social, health, and cultural dispossession and genocide of climate change, and including the ecocide and terroricide of Mother Earth and Father Sky. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I think that was really straight to the point, and a lot of is also covered or captured in that. Tom has been able to also help us see that there's a difference between funding and finance. And then you spoke also about the financialization of the climate space and the assault that this entire parade or hypocrisy displayed as solution, the assault that it is really on the indigenous peoples, on people in general, on our livelihoods, on the earth itself, on the aquatic world or universe itself, and so on. And the fact that for as long as we keep talking not in terms of what has been done, in terms of criminal activities of the past and of the present, and the one we are still going to see in the future, in which case we should be talking reparations, climate reparations. If we don't continue to focus on that, then we'll keep being distracted by these industries, by the corporations that have also infiltrated the space. I mean, look all around us. Look at who is dominating the space right now, who is in the rooms, controlling the conversations, and trying to engineer what the solutions should be. I mean, it's an assault on not just our intelligence, but on people in general. If the people who are really directly affected, who are impacted and vulnerable, are not even captured, their voices are not in the room, and the same people you find at the table are the same polluters, corporates, they are lobbyists, they are delegates, they are representatives, then it's an assault on people, and it shouldn't be allowed to continue. So thank you very much, Tom. Speaking on equity, finance, and then a bit about Article 6 there. So we are going to go to Kwame very quickly. So we have also said that there are solutions, and the solutions must be people-focused and people-oriented. So Kwame is going to expose to us what some of these solutions are. We have said net zero is not zero. There's real zero. So Kwame is going to talk more about that. Kwame, we are eager to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. After hearing my comrade speakers, it is obvious that the polluters and the states are playing games. They are playing games and using mathematics to solve the climate crisis. Net zero is not a real solution. So this way of thinking of polluters and their complicits, who are the states, pushing forward net zero, which encourage more CO2 emission and consolidates action towards carbon offsetting, is dangerous for people, especially for local communities and indigenous people. What they have said, the consequences of climate crisis in Africa is all here. So we have put together some of the impact of climate change on vulnerable communities. And if you get this book, you'll see what exactly happening with communities on the ground in Africa. Having that said, we strongly reject net zero schemes and calling for real zero. The CO2 emission must be reduced at the source. We always say that, and we need to continue to say it. It means stop financing fossil fuels and its expansion, especially in Africa. We need to keep the fossil underground and recognize the communities that are making efforts to keep underground fossils as climate champions. That's very important. Local communities and indigenous people hold the best science and practices to save the planet from the global warming. Community forest conservation and management and agroecology are the best practices that can overcome the climate crisis. Community forest conservation and management protect better forest and ecosystem, and agroecology limit the use of fossil fuels and augment the production and sequestrate the carbon in the soil. Why don't we promote agroecology? Why don't we fund agroecology? Why don't we give directly funding for communities for ecology, for community forest management? That we need. We don't need finance for fossil. So it's very important to recognize that local communities and indigenous people know better their lands. They know what to do with their land. They know better their forests. They know how to conserve the forest with the traditional knowledge, with the traditional conservation. So it is very important to always remind the polluters and the states that the best science is being held by the local communities and indigenous people. So regarding loss and damage, I think we have been listening to Nemo saying that the COP itself is lost and damaged because the COP is not going into the right direction. Yes, but as we are talking of loss and damage, I think we want money to be paid for loss and damage. Communities have been suffering so much. Historically, they have been suffering so much from climate crisis. And having that said, I think it's very important to lead that finance directly to the communities. And we are saying now paying the debt of climate. Paying climate debt is very important. So regarding access to energy, it should not be developed solely for profit, but to ensure the dignity of all people and reduce energy poverty. Especially for Africa, a just recovery renewable energy plan should be adopted, taking into consideration the principles of energy sufficiency, energy sovereignty, and seeing energy as common good rather than a commodity. Climate justice needs to be made central at COPs. Every COPs need to take into consideration climate justice as central. So corporate and parties must consider in their decision communities and people's rights. We want climate solutions that are in harmony with Mother Earth, that respect people's rights. The talks here need to consider humans and people's rights. What we have seen in the negotiations, they are talking of loss and damage. They are talking of putting funding, but there is a process. If they have to pay loss and damage, they cannot pay. We cannot value our life. The life is so important that we cannot value it. So transform or exchange money with life is not a solution. So what we want is to cut at the source the emission, is to reduce totally the carbon emission to have life on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Cut emission at source, agroecology, a just energy transition that is not just a transition, but that is truly just. You spoke about also community-based approaches to solving the problems. Thank you so much, Kwame. You have done justice to that topic. And on this note, we are going to take questions, first from the media. If we have media friends among us who have questions for these panels, and then we are going to take questions also from participants at this event. It's important to ask questions and then we get answers in order to get the conversation going. So if we have questions, I would like to see your hand, then I'll recognize. And we have our panelists here still ready to answer the questions. Any question in the room? Okay, great. So I'm just going to show you quickly. Kwame made mention of this. This was one of the things we decided going out of COP26 to capture the voices at the front line. If the COP process itself has determined to keep shutting out people, we will not allow the people's voices to get lost in this process. So impacts of climate change in frontline communities in Africa. This one was done, testimonials are there, so nobody can claim to be oblivious to what the real issues are. This is another one that decided to access climate change, COP26 commitments in Africa. So as much as we come in and go out of the COP space, and then there are so many things we now call commitments or pledges, whatever they are, who is tracking these commitments? And then what happens if there's failure to honor your commitment? What is the penalty? So those are some of the conversations that we are not having enough. There's also, in case you want to understand everything about the African Civil Society brief on Article 6, we did this as well. It's an analysis of what the Article 6 is even about and what we should be talking about as people that are directly concerned. So from everything that this panel has spoken about today also, it's very obvious. I think, was it yesterday, we were saying that from calculations and findings that we are making, we have numbered 636 lobbyists and delegates registered of polluters on this same ground. So we had a major action to kick big polluters out of the process and out of the space. That action was also done. So these are voices that we keep pushing out. These are struggles that are collective and we keep pushing as a people. Our panel is going to have 1 minute to wrap up, to give us final words, but I see a hand in the hall, so I suspect it's a question. So we are going to take that question. Please come forward and take the microphone. Or please, we can get the microphone to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's more of a comment than a question. For me, I think it's quite interesting to hear the suggestion of the carbon offsetting. As I was sitting down, I was just asking myself a question. That's how many lands will we need to offset what they have already polluted, not even talking about what they are about to pollute. Because when they offset, they need a land to plant trees. When they release carbon, they need a land to plant trees to absorb those carbon. And we all know that in developing countries, most people are agriculturalists. They depend on land for farming, and that's their source of livelihood. The more they pollute, the more land they need to plant trees to offset.
Yes.
How many land do we have for them to continue to pollute? So for us, the simple solution is to just leave it in the ground, not to release before you. And apart from the complexity in the calculation and accounting, it's too complex, and the solution is simple. Just leave it on the ground, and everything is solved. Apart from that, there's another fourth solution that the people are talking about that I think people need to have their minds around. Is the issue of biomass fuel. Simple put, a lot of biomass fuel are from trees. So people plant forests or trees which have absorbed carbon for over 20, 30, 40 years, are cut into chips, they are burned in the form of biomass, and they release carbon. So I find it difficult to understand why people call biomass a renewable source of energy. Biomass are from trees, trees are cut, trees absorb carbon, and they are burned to the atmosphere. So I see all this as some form of false solution to this.
Thank you very much. I think his was a rhetorical question, not necessarily a question, and you made really brilliant comments. Thank you. Tom will speak briefly to what he has said, and then we have...
Just really brief. Thank you for your comments. That reminded me back in 2002 in Joburg, in Johannesburg. It was the World Summit on Unsustainable Greed. That's what I call it, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, 10 years after the Earth Summit. I remember I met the scientist there, and that scientist told me, you know, this whole discussion of offsets, and there was a big political debate going on with the countries. He said, you know, with all the greenhouse gases that's coming, all that methane and carbon that's still coming this way from years back, and what's being generated now and into the future. He said it's going to take 4 planets the size of Earth, 4 planets full of trees to even offset that greenhouse gas. 4 planets Earth. So it's a fantasy. It's a cover-up. It's been pulled over politicians and civil society, and that's why we have books like Hoodwink in the Hot House that exposes this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. So we take the hand from there. I think that's Cadmus, and then we come here to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my question would be this. They talk about loss and damage, and when you go into areas like the Niger Delta areas, people have died from extractive activities. Families have been displaced. Water has been polluted. Who pays for these things? Those families that have died, those communities that have been displaced, how would they get the reparation they need? How would they get the loss and damage, the so-called loss and damage they are talking about? How would that land be restored? Like the Ogoni land, they talk about 30 years of restoration, but it's a lifetime restoration process. It will take a lifetime for that land to be clean. So who will talk about the loss and damage of Ogoni land? Ogoni land can never remain the same. Even when they talk about loss and damage, Ogoni land is already lost and is damaged. So we need restoration, not loss and damage. We need payment of climate debts. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Cadmus. Would anyone like to respond to that? I think that was straight to the point. But Nemo, I'm sure you will say something. You're from that land.
Well, thank you so much. He has said it all. There are some things you cannot pay for. You can't pay for life. You can't, but there's always been an attempt. Capitalism actually thinks it can pay for life. That's why you have life insurance. And that's why, which is absolutely nonsense. And then you have also situation, because life doesn't really count when it comes to profit. You discount life, discount the environment, discount everything. This is what has been permitting the damage that we're seeing. So we need to have what will help us and help the polluters is really for us to have recognized the ecocide as a crime in international law, so that those who carry out, who inflict irreparable harm to environment and to community territories should be held to account by the International Criminal Court or at a similar level. I think this will be a very good benefit to polluters, because then they will know that there are certain guardrails that will hold them accountable for their irresponsible criminal activities.
Oh, yes, Dipti, please go ahead.
It's a really important point that's been raised about so many parts of the world, sacrifice zones where the land has been sacrificed, where the people have been sacrificed. And that is why we have friends who are fighting for a binding treaty on transnational corporations, not voluntary guidelines, because corporations cannot be trusted to govern themselves. That's why we need a binding treaty where we demand there are rules for corporations and rights for people. And that's where comes in compensation for corporate crimes that have already occurred in places like Comrade was talking about. So it's really important, along with our demands for, I think very integral to our demand for climate justice is what Kwame was talking about, community forest management and agroecology, peasant agroecology, but also at the same time, binding treaty on transnational corporations needs to be a very integral part of how we as climate justice activists also understand how are we going to make corporations pay for their crimes that they have committed, and how are communities who have been affected going to get redress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Very important points. And on that note also, we have the liability roadmap that has been spelled out, that has been designed. Lest they say, oh, we are confused, we don't know how to go about these things. It's a bunch of guidelines as to how you can approach it. If you are going to combine legislation with litigation, what are the stages, what are the places you can go to? All of these things have been put together, and you can see that also online, www.liabilityroadmap.org. I hope I'm correct. Most of us here were part of putting it together. So, you know, all of those things are there. Thank you so much, Dipti. Another hand. Thank you.
Thanks so much. This is really inspiring to hear all these, and it's so many important issues at stake. But I just wanted to mention a small resource that might be useful in relation to this question of how the mitigation burden is being pushed from the fossil sector onto land. I've been part of a research group. We've produced a report that we call the Land Gap Report, where we've gone through all countries' climate pledges and plans. It shows that approximately 1.2 billion hectares of land is in these plans that's proposed to be used to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Approximately half of that requires land use changed away from pastoralism and farming onto afforestation and tree planting, so a clear risk of displacement in terms of land use. The other half includes some language around agroecology, some of the things that we talk about, restoration, that is actually maybe going in the right direction. But there's clearly a massive idea across the countries of the world to use land as a way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the report contains a lot of numbers on this that can maybe be of use to some of the great work that you're doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So we have rich resources that we can also tap into, and you can approach him after this session to maybe get links to that report. Yes, please.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, so really fantastic interventions by everybody, and I think this is a super tricky question, because we can also see here a lot of companies, a lot of corporations, but also some countries calling for finance, and they see land, but also agroecology as a mitigation strategy for themselves. And that's tricky, right? When they say restoration, what do they mean? Do they mean it's going to be included in carbon markets? Do they mean it's financing for carbon sequestration instead of fossil fuel emissions reductions? So when I hear, like, you know, the Land Gap, a really fantastic piece of work, by the way. It's really well worth a read. But it is a question I have, and I wonder if you can comment. We also, you know, because sometimes as activists and campaigners, we have to see where they are going, not just what they're saying here, but what is their plan in 5 years. So I wonder if any of you can comment on that issue.
Thank you very much. Tom, you'd like to respond to that?
These questions are getting me fired up here. For one thing, we got to look at the fine print. We got to look at these carbon offset contracts. They're one of the most difficult contract agreements to get a hold of. They're like top secret. I know what these look like, however, from the north as well as in the Amazon. Now, here's people what need to know. When it comes to carbon offsets, carbon trading, it's treating carbon as a commodity, what we call in the north a white system or Eurocentric system, a market system where if you trade anything and treat it as a commodity, you got to determine whose property right that is. So it's a property right issue. So if they're trading air, it's a property right issue. It goes into the arena of privatization and commodification from our perspective of the sacred. So at the end of the day, who owns the carbon in the soil? Who owns the carbon in the ocean? Who owns the carbon in the trees? Our conservation 30 times 30, it is not the local community, it's not the local farmers. It's the corporations who are buying the credits. They're buying that piece of paper that has a value to it in the market system. So when it comes legally, they are the owner of the land throughout the world. If you look at research, there's even figures on how much land is available in the world. So it's a scam of corporate privatization of land through market system. Financialization of nature, that's what it's about. And yes, your question is right on. I think maybe Dipti has an answer to that one, but it's layers and layers of this that's happening that we need to know what's really going on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Dipti, you want to say something? And Kwame, you would add after Dipti.
After.
Okay, Kwame, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kirtana, for your question as well. So I think if you see what's going on in Africa, actually, in terms of restoration itself, the project Africa Landscape Restoration is leading to monoculture plantation, actually. But they are saying they are restoring the forest, but it's not true. In South Africa, for instance, the landscape restoration is being displaced people, actually. So we know where they are going to, but they just put in place some of the projects to flow our African government, to flow our African leaders, that they are going to resolve the climate change. But it's not true. All those things are commodification of nature. So we need to be very careful if we're talking of restoration, we're talking of land use and so on. Thank you.
Great. Dipti.
So I think it's very important to have and for us to be able to use the really shocking numbers about how much land is going to be needed, because we are also trying to stop the fossil fuel expansion. That's the first thing. That is absolutely what we need to be doing. But to show the ridiculousness of how much land is actually going to be needed to offset what they are absolutely continuing to produce and continuing to pollute. So for example, corporate accountability told us that just for the companies Eni, Shell, and Nestle, just to offset their emissions, the amount of land that is going to be needed is 3 times all of the forests in the country of Malaysia. So, and what the land grab report also does is to give us this scale of just how much land is going to be needed. And it really reminds us of the term that some of us have been talking about, planet grab. I remember with colleagues a few years ago, Nimo and Tom and myself, we were in a meeting in Maputo in 2013. 9 years ago, we were talking about Africa grab. What has happened in the last 9 years, it has escalated. The scale has just increased to a level that we are now talking about planet grab. And this is a crisis that we are being faced with. But of course, the question is very, very relevant about what is it that actually counts as restoration and what does not. And we need to be really careful and mindful about this, because the powers that be will always find a way to co-opt what we are talking about, will always find a way to undermine what we are talking about, will always find a way to financialize what we are talking about. So if we say that peasant agroecology is the solution to the climate crisis, they're going to find a way to turn agroecology into a big financial market, and then we have JBS and big companies trying to do it and make money out of it. So we need to understand the logic of the way that financial markets are operating and how they're constantly needing to extend. Okay, so there were financial markets for fossil fuels. Okay, now we have a problem with fossil fuels. Let's financialize what people are even suggesting as the solution to fossil fuels. So the logic of the way that financial markets are working is something that we need to be able to understand and to project and predict and to be able to fight that. So we understand that subsistence-based communities who are living with the resources and taking care of the resources, what does restoration look like in that case? What does restoration look like in the case of the Niger Delta, where corporate crimes have polluted the air, the land, the water, people's bodies, every single thing that is polluted? And the responsibility of the companies that created that to address that, that's a restoration that we need to be able to stand behind. But there are so many other models of restoration that are being put forward with a financialized way of working to be able to sell off that resource to someone else, to say you can only save it by selling it, and that's what we need to be able to oppose. But it's really, really important to bring in these nuances into our discussion, because that is because the lack of that nuance is what we are seeing in the world outside. You know, we hear the term nature-based solutions, and it's meant to sound really nice and meant to sound really green, but actually it throws together a whole bunch of things and it makes it completely meaningless, and it makes it really, really problematic. So that's why we need to be really looking into the nuances, and we need to know that whatever solutions we come up with, the financial markets are going to co-opt that and make it dirty, and then we're going to even struggle to recognize what we advocated for in those solutions. So we need to be always prepared for that. And it's so important. I'm so glad that while we're talking about the fossil fuel house of cards and the false solutions, we're also talking about the real solutions, because we have a vision. Collectively, all of us, we have a vision for what we want the world to look like, and it's really important that we're always talking about that, not just what we don't want, but what is it that we do want? What does the world look like that we do want to live in?
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Deepti. Thank you for the collective reactions. And thank you, Ketani, for provoking this further conversation and the reactions we have gotten. So we have to be careful, even in those solutions that we bring forward, in owning our narratives and what we call solutions, so that they don't steal. I remember we were talking about this yesterday, even the planet grab, and how at the end of the day, you struggle to recognize what you brought to the table, simply because these people are so profit-oriented, and they are, let's call it what it is, criminals, as a matter of fact, always looking for ways to grab what you have brought to the table and then rework it, re-engineer it in a way that it's about financialization at the end of the day, commodification of nature, which shouldn't be. So thank you for provoking this reaction. So I think we have one more question, and then we take our final words, 2 minutes each, from the panelists. We did really great with time, and then we wrap it. I saw a hand on the other side. Oh, sorry, I saw a hand here. Invisible hand.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nazir with the Minnesota Environmental Justice Table. And my question is really, I think I got here a couple days ago, and my realization is that so much of what I hear from a lot of the spaces that I've been in seem like, the increasingly desperate ramblings of a civilization that is, the engineers of a civilization that is failing. And my question is, we're talking about real solutions. What is the political solution? I think especially in a space convened by the United Nations itself, whatever limited teeth it has came from the work of the non-aligned movement, third worldists. And so for us to contend in this space, my question is it worth to continue to participate in these COPs? Is it worth to push through this vehicle of the United Nations anymore? And I think we talked a lot about maybe technocratic solutions, or I think there's a lot of visions for what it should look like, but my question is, how do we win what we need, what that vision we know we need?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for asking that question. You're quite right. I think we're at a point in the world today when something new has to happen. We've had other multilateral efforts in the past that ended, and even the civilization we have now is coming to an end. The petroleum civilization has to end, otherwise it's going to end life. We've seen in the past where there were big civilizations building gigantic monuments, and now we just look at them as monuments. Just like in the future, I believe people will look at skyscrapers and ask questions. Why did they build these things? Just like we look at the pyramids. If you go to Cairo or you go to Mexico to see all those pyramids that were built there. So the civilization is winding down. The challenge for us now is either to manage the winding down, or we wait for the cataclysm to happen, and then we have no options at all, which is what flooding, for example, shows us. Whether you're prepared or not, when it happens, you are not really prepared. So really the civilization is coming to an end. The economic system is not working, it's failing, and the system we have at the COP now is struggling to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is not tenable. And so whether we like it or not, we have to just simply have a different arrangement. This arrangement would not work. An arrangement where the UN cannot fund itself, for example, and has to depend on corporations. We've seen it in all the other COPs. Corporations that should be on the dissecting table are the ones funding the COP. Then what do you expect to have? Say, who pays the piper, the text? That's why we're dancing to the wrong dance. And we would not dance to their beat, which is why we're here. We don't want to dance to their beat. Otherwise, we'll be in the chambers, they're debating and putting the real solutions in square brackets. The real solutions are in square brackets. By the time the square brackets are removed, there's nothing again. In Glasgow Pact said that climate justice is important for only some people. When you see a text like that climate justice is important only to some people, that is crazy. Because the foundation of the UNFCCC, the foundational principle was the common but differentiated responsibilities. That is climate justice. When climate justice becomes something that is only important for some people, that means that even the COP has lost its mind.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nimo. Like the conversation we were having about climate justice without human rights. That justice without human rights is not justice in the first place. So, and I love what Dipti said about it not just being an alarming situation wherein we are crying and lamenting. We are saying this is false, but then this is real. So we have a balance of stories. So if we are faulting a system, we're also bringing forward what we know is the solution, which is people-oriented and people-focused. And that's why it's not all doom. We just have to ensure that we keep holding down the space the way we are currently doing and pushing our narrative until we succeed. Dipti will say something briefly, and then we're out.
It's a really beautiful question, and I think these are the kind of conversations we need to be having. It's so interesting you use the word civilization because of where we are. We are in Egypt. And one of the other oldest civilizations, the Indus Valley civilization in Pakistan, they've just gone through the most devastating floods. This is what is happening to people's communities, and this is why we need to care about this. As for the question of the COPs, it's a really good question, and it's a difficult question, and I know all of us are dealing with this and struggling with this. One of the ways that we look at it as Friends of the Earth International is that we need to use all avenues available to be able to fight back. One of the things about this space, the UNFCCC in particular, not just the UN. Of course, the UN is a multilateral body. So there is still, in principle, each of our countries, Nigeria and Mozambique and Scotland, each has a vote of its own. We know that's not how it works. We know that's not how geopolitics actually plays out. But as compared to the G7 or the G20 or the WTO, which are completely unaccountable bodies, there is some kind of pretense of accountability here still. But also one difference that I find with the UNFCCC, I was talking earlier about the binding treaty and all of those meetings, as important as they are, super critical to do that and to push for the binding treaty. All of those negotiations happen in Geneva. The one thing that is still a redeeming factor, tiny, tiny redeeming factor for the UNFCCC COP is that it actually circulates across regions. It's come back to Africa now after 6 years. 2016 was the last time that the COP was actually held in the Global South. It was supposed to be held in the Global South in 2017 and 19. It wasn't because of the circumstances of that time. But at least we can come to countries like Egypt and people can be seen. People's struggles can be seen. I'm sure some of you heard, why are COPs being held in places where, where local civil society is not even allowed to be there? It's a valid question, and we're going to talk about it because we're talking about shrinking civil society space. We're talking about human rights. But at the same time, the civil society here, the progressive civil society here also has a right to be seen. So when we engage in this process, it's important to do it with the right idea, the right values of we're going to bring solidarity, we're going to link up. We need to build a global movement. So this is one of the spaces where that can happen. What we cannot do is come here and think that we're actually going to produce a change, because then we're giving hope to all of the people outside who cannot get here that, no, don't worry, I'm going to the COP, so I'm going to take care of it. Absolutely not. We're not going to do anything at all, but we are going to fight. We're going to speak up, and we're going to be visible, and we're going to use every avenue possible to be able to fight back. I think that's the tiny thing that we do, and we need to keep fighting. As Allah says in his book, we will not be defeated.
A people united will never be defeated. Thank you so much, Dipsy, for ending on that powerful note. We will fight. And when we fight, we win. So we have our last round, which is 2 minutes from each panelist to just give final words. This time around, I'm not directing the angle of what you are going to talk about, just your final words. And I'll take it from Kwame, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Don't let Africa burn. Africa people are dying. So it's very important that states and polluters, they understand that the real solutions that we need is to keep the fossils underground and stop promoting those false solutions. Carbon offsetting is not a good solution for communities, and local communities are being displaced because of monoculture tea plantations. Local communities are being suffering because of climate crisis. So we don't want the climate to continue. That's why we said stop emitting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Great final words. Tom, please.
Yeah, I was just feeling that feeling again. Whenever I come to the COPs or whenever I go to other corporate-led UN convenings, it's a sense of wanting, kind of not wanting, but a feeling of disempowerment. I think coming from a community and a peoples and struggle for ever since colonization of our country in the North America, I know what that feels like, and that's why I'm calling it out. One of the issues that I always want to talk about is that, for example, Article 6 in the Paris Agreement. It has everything to do about perpetuating business as usual around carbon market systems. So we've been saying, well, in the implementation, let's create some grievance mechanisms so that communities have a way to express concerns on things that are coming down, violating our human rights. But there's so much resistance in the system just to recognize language to establish a grievance procedure, mechanisms for local communities so they won't get ripped off. Some of you may support reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. RED is very popular. A lot of the major non-government organizations supported that. Global Forest Coalition, stood with us. We fought it hard. Foundation said, well, your organizations, you're not going with the flow. We're not going to give you another grant to do resistance because you're not going with the flow. So we have to challenge a system that doesn't want to allow our voices to be heard. I am a member of the steering committee of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we just had Vanuatu and Tuvalu sign on as Pacific Island states, and that's what we need to continue to do. We have a mechanism where we're challenging the large industrialized countries who are controlling a lot of the decision making, but like advancing the adoption of a global registry of fossil fuels within the UN institution. That's innovative. That's a solution. But a solution is that we need to cut ourselves away from a fossil fuel economy. In Minnesota, definitely 40 below wind chill, we can find a mechanism. Renewable energy is here, it's now, it's cheap. We can make a just transition, and we have data in the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty on how to make a transition, a global just transition to renewable energy. So we do have solutions from the local level and then through global initiatives like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. So we come to Nemo.
Thank you so much. Well, I would just like to say that that's fine. The labels are flying away, that's fine. The Paris targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius or way below 2 degrees, I believe were set from the top of somebody's head because it wasn't based on the well-being of most parts of the planet. At a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature above pre-industrial levels, Africa would experience about over 2 degrees Celsius. So that beautiful target 1.5 was already sentencing Africa to burn because Africa has about 50% higher than the global average. Now, the NDCs have been calculated. The one submitted, ambition submitted, now shows that the world is heading for 2.8 degrees Celsius temperature increase. That means Africa is really going to be set on fire, and it will be uninhabitable for the people. And so this, for us to meet in Sham and pretend that there is time, that we have time before these issues can be addressed, it just shows that there is something fundamentally wrong with humans, especially those with power. Now, the more things deteriorate, the more the fossil fuel industry making profits. Look at the profits they announced recently. One of the companies is going to announce a profit of $30 billion US. Another one 14 billion, another one 26.5, another one 16, another one 28.7. And I mean, all these, Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Total Energy, Eni, Conoco, Phillips, they're all having obscene profit levels. Now, at a time when there is absolute existential crisis on the planet. Now, when corporations are making so much profit and are comfortable, having everything they want, do you think they're going to allow you to do anything that affects that profit? This is the issue. This is why the COP is not delivering on what could help us solve the problem. This is why we need something other than the COP. Other than the COP. Because the COP, again, I mean, I'm not tired of repeating this, the COP is lost and damaged because of those who are driving the process. In 2009, the leader of the African delegation, Ambassador Lumumba, wept at a press conference when the discussion was that we could permit something slightly more than 1 degree Celsius temperature increase. Now we're already at 1.1, 1.2, and we're heading for 2.8. We won't have tears enough to cry, but we have time to organize. We have time to resist the opening of one single more oil well or one gas well. As I speak, there's a gas well that's been on fire in Nigeria for 2 years now, non stop, from April 2020. A well that was being drilled that just burst and caught fire. And we're pretending nothing's going on. Nobody's talking about it. Nothing's going. That is on fire for more than 2 years. And now there's plan to drill for gas and oil in Kavango, in Namibia, to look for oil in Virunga Park forest in Congo, to look for gas in Solom Delta in Senegal, to extract more gas from my region, to ship to Europe. The more we look at money rather than look at life, the more we sink into the morass that has no return. And I just hope that we're going to wake up from sleep and see that we are in very dire situation. I wish I could give some hope, but the real hope is in the people rising up and say, no more, not more oil, not one more oil well. The hope is in the people. The corporations and the politicians have totally lost it. They are the lost and the damaged. And our territories must not be lost or damaged.
Thank you so much, Nimo. That is such a charge. Thank you. And who are we? We are the people. Who are we? We are the people. Thank you very much. The solution is in the people. The hope is in the people. And we keep pushing. So, Deepti, your final words.
How am I expected to go after that? I'm sitting on the stage with giants. And all of us were walking in the footsteps of giants, all of our ancestors that survived and fought and gave us the ability to be here. We honor that and we keep doing it, we keep fighting. And there's one piece that we need to always include also as part of our climate justice solutions, which is gender justice and centering and valuing the centrality of life and care and being able to take care of ourselves and each other, even in the movement. And actually, there was another part of your question, comrade, that was really interesting. What is the political system that is actually going to work and going to deliver? It doesn't look like that, because we're facing a political crisis along with all the other crises that we're facing as well. And I think the message that we need to be giving to ourselves and to everyone in the movement is that it's only people power that's going to get us out of this crisis, because each one needs to recognize their power and build power in our communities and not hand over our power to anybody. Not to our government officials, not to our religious leaders, not to the men in our lives. Absolutely not. We need to build power at every single level, and for people to know that when they get together, they can change things. For me, it's the only thing that's going to challenge the way that power operates in the world, is to make sure that each person and each community is able to build their power.
Thank you so much, Deepti. Thank you very much. I say a big thank you to all our panelists, and I think it's on this note also that I should say a huge thank you to Friends of the Earth International, IEN, thank you so much. Corporate Accountability, we can't thank you enough. CEO, Corporate Europe Observatory, thank you so much. GFC, and all of the groups that are represented here, Oil Watch, HOMEF, Kappa, thank you very much. So we are grateful. And remember, a people united can never be defeated. We still have the statement of the Kick Big Polluters out. We are still taking sign-ons, so people can still sign. You can go online and sign that statement. It's a petition, and you can add your signature to it. On this note, I want to say thank you very much. It has been a beautiful time with you all, and I say thank you to all the panelists. People power, people power, people power. A people united can never be defeated. Thank you.
And you can get a copy, download it, it's digital, the Climate Finance Report that we produce. Here's the barcode. You can come up and get a card. Thank you.
We have copies of all of these reports on the table. So if you want a hard copy, please pick them. One is Impact of Climate Change in Frontline Communities in Africa. Yeah, we have them at the back. You will see Comrade Philip is holding them. Then we have the African Civil Society brief on Article 6. You can pick that up also.
There is more hoodwink publication. There's some in Arabic as well. There's some more booklets of the hoodwinked in the hot house way in the back there. We do have it in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Portuguese. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, test. Hello, test.